functions. So before I get into it, Kashini, one of the things I wanted to ask is why transformation matters to Nedbank. Why is it so important?
So thank you, Ralph, and thank you for that very good introduction. I'm actually humbled by it. Thanks very much. And good morning to all of the viewers that have taken the time to join. So yes, thanks for your question. I think one of the very important facts, Ralph, of why transformation matters to Nedbank is that our journey actually preceded BEE legislation. And so I'll talk about it just now when I show a bit of a timeline, but our approach is also something that supports both our business as well as the national strategic priorities. So you'll see on the slide, I have a quote from the National Development Plan, which says, if South Africa registers progress in deracializing ownership and control of the economy without reducing poverty and inequality, transformation will be superficial. Similarly, if poverty and inequality are reduced without demonstrable changed ownership patterns, the country's progress will be stifled. And unfortunately, we are in that situation in the country, but fortunately, transformation is still happening across a lot of the companies. And for us specifically, we do feel it needs to be a catalyst for higher levels of inclusive growth in the country. And of course, we are certainly committed to working together with business, government, etc., in order to transform. So I just wanted to share a bit of a timeline because I think reflection is extremely important in this journey. It's not a destination, we have not arrived, but if you just cast your eye to the slide and why it certainly matters, you will see that as early as 1990, Nedbank was actually seen as an elitist bank. We were not seen as a bank for all. And then in 2003 specifically, we were actually making a 1.5 billion loss. So when I say our journey preceded BEE legislation, it's primarily because of that. We started to see transformation even at that point as a moral and business imperative in order for us as a business to remain relevant in the societies in which we are operating. So if you cast your eye there, you will see we were actually not profitable. And then in 2004, we formally became a signatory of the charter. Very importantly, also in 2005, we actually executed our BEE Ayetu transaction. And at that point in time, Ralph, our share price was actually 74.75. So by the time the deal vested, the share price was north of 200. So there was more than 8.2 billion of value created for different beneficiaries across the board, being staff, clients, shareholders, our Black business partners who are Wuppold and Brimstone, etc. So just some other things to touch on as well. We also in 2006 appointed Dr. Will Khoza, who was the first Black African board chairman, which was a great appointment. We also came up with the transformation truths and so on. And then from 2013 all the way to 2020, there were quite a few accolades that we have won. But further to that, I wanted to just touch on what was happening in the industry based, and then how are we really dovetailing. So if you look at the 90s, I mean, we all remember the release of Mr. Mandela. And then actually in 1998, the Employment Equity Act, many will remember, was actually promulgated. And in 1999, very interestingly enough, the ANC actually at that point in time appointed President Cyril Ramaphosa to lead the BEE Commission. And he was the one with his team at the time who actually came up with BEE and drafted a strategy, but then also changed BEE to BBEE. So he put in the broad-based nature of it. And that was really because they felt that narrow-based means just a few people are benefiting, whereas broad-based really challenged everyone to go broader. And that is why the second round of BEE deals in the industry you would have seen would have been more broad-based, such as ours. Now, interestingly enough, in 2002, it was when the first financial sector charter was actually hosted and held. But the code itself was only promulgated, you will see on the slide, in 2012. So in other words, it took 10 years to negotiate the code. Now, this will just give you a sense later on when we're talking to some of the challenges. But in the meantime, we were still all transforming as an industry and as a company. So on this slide, perhaps just a couple more highlights. So the codes were only, the generic code as we know it was only gazetted in 2007. The financial sector code only in 2012. But then in 2013, the minister issued a new code. So whenever a new code is issued, it means your sector codes have to realign. Now, why this is important is because if our sector code was only promulgated in 2012, and now in 2013, we had to start updating it. Then we had a new version in 2017. So 2017, we had the amended FSC, but guess what? In 2018, we're actually reviewing the amended FSC. So it just gives you a sense of how this whole environment is about building the plane whilst you're flying. It is a very fluid environment. So this is important just to set the context a bit for the journey and why transformation matters to Nedbank.
It's the most famous words on Zoom, guys. It's, are you on mute? You're on mute. And I was. So my voice is coming through. So obviously, that's amazing, and to show that sort of impact. But I mean, are you able to share other successes? Like, how has it affected the bottom line of Nedbank? Is there a correlation between what you've done and the bottom line and other elements?
Yes, thank you, Ralph. So definitely. So you'll see as the slides bold up on the screen. So firstly, I'm just giving a sense of our headline earnings from 2006 all the way to 2020. So you will notice the headline earnings were actually improving. When there was a slight dip, you can see this is between 2008 and 2009, and we know that the global financial crisis happened. But other than that, you will see there was an uptick in our headline earnings continuously through the journey. And why this is important, Ralph, is because transformation and growth are positively correlated. In order for you to transform, well, in order for you to do anything, you need money. But it's really about how are you deploying that capital? How are you integrating that capital across various metrics? So headline earnings, certainly you will see the shape is right. But at the same time, between 2006 all the way to 2020, this now measures our cultural entropy. So cultural entropy is really looking at the level of dysfunction in your organization through measuring things like your values fit, which I'll chat about later on. But on this slide, a lower number is actually better. So you'll see in 2006, we were at 19. But just to give a bit of context on the 19, before 2006, when I said to you, we were seen as an elitist bank and we were making a loss, we were actually at about 29 or 26 for entropy. And when you're at that level, it shows that there are significant issues in your organization. So then the numbers started coming down. You will see 19, 17, then coming down all the way to 10 in 2012. Now 10 is actually regarded as a best practice organization from a culture perspective. And then, of course, as you go along the journey, you'll see quite a big spike, maybe from 2017 to 2018, but we were making quite a few organizational changes there. But I think what's important is we don't only check headline earnings, we check how the culture is shifting. Now, what's also important, you would have probably noticed the branding on the slide, and you'll see Make Things Happen, which was our previous branding. And now you'll see the new refreshed branding, which is really about seeing money differently. So again, this picture is important because it's not only about bottom line, it's also about culture and also how your brand has been shifting. And then last but not least, I'm just showing you the BBEE score. So again, you'll see in 2006, we were at quite a low score, but very quickly in 2009, we already achieved a level 2. And then Ralph, this level 2, we retained for 10 consecutive years after reaching level 1 in 2018. And currently we are still at level 1. So a lot of people say, yes, transformation is beyond the numbers, etc. 100% agreed. Because if you're just looking at numbers, you won't get this picture. But numbers are very important to track and measure because we all know that what gets measured gets done. And if we weren't measuring these things, we would actually have no sort of benchmark of how we're doing and where we are. So yes, Ralph, in a nutshell, you can see our headline earnings directionally moving in the right way. At the same time, our cultural entropy score declining, so it's a more healthy culture and environment. And of course, at the same time, our BBEE score ticking up. And of course, I didn't specifically mention the drop in 2020 because we all know the COVID situation and the economic climate challenges there. So before I hand back to you, Ralph, I think I just want to show a video, which is going to show a bit of color and give a bit of color to these numbers. So over to Tim, thanks.
Doing good. Everyone talks about it. It's written in company memos and in big bold letters on the walls of high-rise offices. But while everyone talks about doing good, at Nedbank, we are living it by doing business in a way that drives a sustainable difference for individuals, businesses, communities, and the environment. We are committed to transforming and advancing a national social compact to rebuild the economy, being a catalyst for inclusive growth and enhancing social cohesion in South Africa. Our philosophy for purpose-led transformation is that it must transcend legislation to meet national interests while leveraging components of human, socio-economic, financial, and leadership capital. As a responsible business that is committed to playing our part in building a sustainable future for our country, we know that nothing is more urgent than giving our people hope for a better future. This is the glue that binds successful societies. At Nedbank, we believe we are uniquely positioned to play our part to help ensure that our economy works for every South African. Yes, born out of the CEO initiative, was officially launched in March 2018 by President Ramaphosa as part of a collective effort to address the youth unemployment crisis facing our country. Nedbank first participated in the initiative in 2019 by employing the youth through various roles within Nedbank and partnering organizations. At the end of the 2019 program, 591 of the recruits were permanently placed within Nedbank and its implementation partners. The COVID-19 pandemic reiterated the urgent need to find a solution for the youth unemployment crisis in South Africa. This year, we welcomed 1,905 recruits onto the program. Nedbank launched the in-house Enterprise and Supplier Development Program in 2015. The program is a combination of business mentorship, business acumen, and specialist training, as well as personal coaching. Through our Enterprise and Supplier Development Program, we supported organizations such as Mila Services, a Level 1 Black women-owned cleaning services business with a unique model that empowers qualifying staff members to become business owners. This has seen it grow from 22 employees to over 500 with over 10 franchises. The Nedbank Black Business Partners Legacy Trust was created to fund Nedbank's funding obligations to the Nedbank Old Mutual BBEE Legacy Program. This program was agreed to between Nedbank, Old Mutual, Wiphold, Brimstone, and Izingwe to leave a legacy as a result of the successful broad-based Black economic empowerment transaction. One of the initiatives supported by the funds is the Pick and Pay Township Economy Revitalization Program. This public-private partnership between the Gauteng Department of Economic Development, Pick and Pay, and local spaza shop owners is working to upgrade participating spaza stores to meet the needs of customers and communities, thereby helping to grow a new generation of modern retail entrepreneurs and boost economic revitalization and job creation in townships. Since it started, the program has dispersed 20 million rand to 15 supported spaza shops in Gauteng and the Western Cape. In turn, these small businesses have created 282 job opportunities for members of their surrounding communities. Through the Nedbank Old Mutual BBEE Legacy Program, we're also providing over 15 million rand in financial support to emerging farmers and currently support the Qentane and Bashe Agricultural Initiative and Agrika Taung projects. To do good, it's not just words. It's a principle that we live on a day-to-day basis as we seek to continually impact on individuals, society, and our environment. Because being money experts won't make a difference unless that expertise is continually used to drive positive, transformational change.
Wow. I think congratulations to Nedbank. That's absolutely incredible. It really is great to see this, the huge impact you're creating. But Kosh, I think for most people, that unbelievable impact you're creating, it's not easy. Like you showed in the graph numerous dips and challenges. In your mind, what were the big challenges that you guys had to overcome to get to creating that sort of impact?
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. There were quite a lot, in fact, and I'm sure a lot of the guys might also resonate with some of them. So I will just talk to them, not necessarily in any order, but I think fear is something that is very important to talk about because firstly, it's just human nature. And a lot of people at the time saw BEE as having to give up something. So obviously, when your basic need of safety is threatened, you are going to get into a fear mindset. So when you are in a fear mindset, you're not really going to be able to create. And that was one of the key challenges that we had to overcome. And later on, when I talk about our culture journey, I think that was what helped there. Then, of course, as you know, very importantly, BEE was always seen and probably is even seen today as a high cost to business. And people cannot really see the benefits of it. So there has been a lot of criticism. So I'm not saying that it is perfect and it has achieved all of its objectives, but I'm saying we also shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's look at what has worked and then try to progress that. And then let's look at the pain points and how we also move forward there. So I think very importantly, that was really a challenge for us where it was about a compliance mindset. It was seen as reverse discrimination and all of those important things. Then, of course, we needed to get business buy-in because change happens to people, as we know. Organizations don't change, people do. And I think Richard Barrett said it, quite beautifully at the time. Also very interesting, it was a new concept for South Africa. However, you would have perhaps noticed on one of my timeline slides that AA or affirmative action as a concept was already being used in the US in about 1863 or whatever. But still, BEE obviously unique to South Africa because of the previous apartheid regime, etc. So in a nutshell, we were really setting the benchmark. And I think that's where, although this was a challenge, that's where the opportunity came in because we needed to change, we needed to shift, etc. And then, of course, like any other company, staff retention is always going to be a problem when you're trying to make significant change. And like I alluded to earlier on, the bank was seen as elitist. There was a lot of silo mentality. There was a lack of trust, resistance to change. And all of those things were what we sort of got insights from in combination of the Barrett survey and other initiatives as well. Very importantly, there was a skills gap at the time. And I think we can all appreciate that. Then there was also a notion that positions were filled based on color and not on merit, which was also then aggravating the fear that people felt and also aggravating the resistance to change. In the industry at the time, there weren't many Black suppliers that were available. And if you look at, let's just give an example of the bank's procurement spend, 17 billion. So when you have to take a portion of 17 billion and distribute to Black suppliers, we're very happy to do it. But you can't just be redistributing funds. You also have to create more suppliers in order to then redistribute some of the funds. And then, of course, the normal story where most people did not see value from BEE deals. They were feeling like, well, the elite are just benefiting, etc. And I think that was one of the shifts of moving from a more narrow-based mindset to a broad-based mindset where the deals were then benefiting communities as well, as you would have seen with our BBP's legacy program. And then, of course, Ralph, I think I alluded to it, the administrative burden of the codes. So, it's the whole thing of we're building the plane whilst we're flying. There's a code, but it's constantly in review. And also, if one needs to look at how much of time is taken up by very senior people or specialized people to actually continue to be negotiating this code. So I'm not saying it shouldn't be done, but perhaps just the timing of it needs to be relooked. Like, does it have to happen every year? Because if things are not really shifting every year, then what is the point of doing that? And then, of course, we have an annual verification process. But I think at the same time, if you look at that, yes, all of this is a challenge, but let's be honest, BEE actually created a new industry where people actually got employed as well. Because if you think about it, like, there's no BEE specialists in other countries of the world, or there are transformation managers, but it means something else, in other countries of the world. And then perhaps the last point I'll touch on, Ralph, is that my personal view is that the codes are too transactional in nature. But when we talk later a bit about the 5C's, I'll just expand on that point.
Unmute. You're running into my next question. This is so great. But I mean, I suppose, like anything, we've got a big audience who probably have had similar or are experiencing similar challenges. And if you want to put in the Q&A, we can get to those later about maybe your own individual challenges. And Kashini can answer that maybe a little bit later. So don't be scared to answer that. But I suppose it moves really on to those challenges. And one's sort of fixated now where we've seen the improvements in the scorecard, we've seen the improvements in the headline earnings. How on earth did you do it? We want to get the guts now. How did you achieve this?
So Ralph, yes, obviously a huge challenge, but I guess I will position the 5C's at this point because it just sort of wraps everything together quite nicely. Apologies for the slides, but anyway, so what we did, Ralph, is a couple of things. So we think that what's really important in a journey like this is to give clarity of purpose, is to tell people, why are you doing it? What is your North Star? Why does it matter? And some of those things. So that's really around clarity of purpose. Then very importantly, as we talked about the challenges, we needed buy-in. Now, when I say the next C is about commitment from leadership, I don't think it's only about leadership from the top. It's the top, the bottom, laterally, etc. For change to happen, you need to have this guiding coalition. So it doesn't help that you get buy-in from the top, but your middle layer doesn't agree. So commitment from leadership, when I say leadership here, I don't necessarily talk about the CE and the team. Yes, the C-suite are the guys that are driving this. So that's almost like a mandatory thing. But I'm talking about across the organization. There are people delivering in many facets, whether you're in a branch or whether you are in a back office, etc. So commitment from leadership, key. Culture change is fundamental, and we'll talk about it a little later on as well. And then very important for me, I call it creative compliance. So I'm not meaning fronting or window dressing, but at the end of the day, compliance can just be about redistribution, whereas creative compliance for me is about creation. So we don't want to redistribute wealth. So let's take preferential procurement, the earlier example I alluded to. We don't really want to be taking from Mr. Ralph and giving it to Mr. Tabo, for lack of better words. But what we want to do is increase the size of everything, create more suppliers. So from that perspective, you will see how our enterprise development program worked really, really well. So we didn't look at the scorecard in a linear fashion as well. And I'll touch on that later on. And then last but not least, Ralph, communication and connection. We've all, unfortunately, had to face the reality of being disconnected physically through COVID. But remember, sometimes you can be physically present with people, but still have a disconnect. So I think communication and connection is very important. And this has to be a deliberate activity. It can't just be something that's on paper. So in a nutshell, how we did it is by making each of these components live in the organization.
It's quite extraordinary. And I think, credit to you and to Nedbank for what you've achieved. I'm almost fixated, though, that we got these road bumps on this journey where we have economic forces, we have new legislation, you've got your new structure that you implemented. How did this strategy evolve over the years with all these outside forces and internal forces combining at once? It's extraordinary.
Yeah. So Ralph, I think as early as 2003, we were already having strategic conversations around not only transformation, but we were looking at our vision. Okay. We were looking at our values and then all of the things in between. So at the time in 2003, we developed this, what you see on the screen, the strategic framework, or shall I say a version, because it's evolved over the years, right? So in 2003, we had a vision led. So you'll see vision at the second line and values driven at the bottom. So we had a vision led, values driven strategy. We actually called it the Dagwood, like a sandwich, because you got the vision at the top and the values at the bottom and everything in between. So how this was crafted, Ralph, is Tom Boardman at the time convened what he called an SVB, strategy, values, and brand cross-functional work groups. So that probably constituted about 200 people. And these guys were involved in creating what should be the vision of the bank, what should be the values of the bank. And at the time, you may remember, Old Mutual was one of our biggest shareholders. So we also had to share a couple of our values with them. But the value here that you see on people-centered is actually what that cohort of 150 to 200 people created. So this is now talking to the point of clarity of purpose. So the leaders in the organization actually got together to create this. And again, when I say leaders, obviously led by the chief executive, but involving other people from across the bank. And then what we also did is then we just didn't stop at what's the vision, what's the values. We then looked at who we are. Who we are is important because you'll recall me saying we were seen as an elitist bank, which means we were more a bank for the wealthy and for the corporate clients, etc. But at that time, we decided we want to become a bank for all. And so today you'll see we also have a very strong retail presence in the market. Then, of course, the brand was important, like I said. At that time, we felt it was not really resonating with all of our clients. So brand doesn't only happen on its own. We also look at the full spectrum of marketing, which includes things like sponsorship. So you'll know Nedbank is renowned for the golf challenge. We all love it. We still love it. But what obviously happened over the years is we then started to also sort of pivot our strategy sponsorship to look at like the Nedbank Cup, because that really resonates with the full spectrum of people, as well as the running club, etc. And then, of course, very importantly, what were our aspirations? So at the time, we also looked at, you will know the book Good to Great, and most people will know of it. So that is why you'll see we saying great place to work, great place to bank, great place to invest. And of course, world-class at managing risk, because the business of banking is about managing risk. So it's not about being risk averse, but also you need to take risk. And when you're expanding from being an elitist to a more universal bank, you have to look at risk. And very importantly, what the CEO at the time had done is a lot of these concepts were also coming from the ANZ, the Australian bank model. So the CE at the time actually went to Australia, visited ANZ Bank, and then also brought back, some of the learnings. But I personally was involved in the journey as well, Ralph. And what we also did from a culture perspective, which I'll talk about later on, is we also brought in Richard Barrett himself to come in and engage with the leadership team and so on. So really making it live. And then, of course, you'll see the purpose statement right at the top. Now, obviously, in 2003, we did not have a purpose statement. The purpose statement came in later on. So that's why I was just alluding to the evolution of the strategy. So in a nutshell, the important components here is a vision is important because people need to see what you see, or at least try to see what you see. You have to all be on the same page. And then obviously we felt that as the years progressed and we changed our branding in about 2017, we needed to have a purpose statement, because we all know that your profits will follow when you are following your purpose. And the purpose statement of Nedbank is really to use our financial expertise to do good. And that's for individuals, families, businesses, and society. And hopefully you would have seen some of that come through in the video as well. And then very importantly, our strategic framework as early as 2004 already had transformation as a key strategic enabler. So it was always on the map. And in 2004, we said we wanted to go beyond transformation. In 2008, we said we wanted to accelerate. And you'll remember from the graph in the beginning, in 2009, we already achieved a level 2 from the BEE metric perspective. And then from 2009 onwards, we said, well, now we want to challenge ourselves and actually lead. And then, of course, in 2018, actually getting to a level 1. What we also then did, Ralph, is we then basically tried to show everyone, so what is the actual transformation framework in the bank? So you will notice that we are not talking about the BBEE scorecard. That is not our point of departure. That is actually the metric that is measuring how you are transforming based on the code, etc. So like I said earlier on, and if you cast your eye here, you'll see the 4 capitals, okay, which is human capital, socio-economic capital, financial capital, leadership capital. Sorry, my slides are just thinking for themselves. Yeah, so in a nutshell, Ralph, what's happening here is that we are saying that capital is a resource that needs to be leveraged. And the way we have to leverage capital is by considering human capital as well as socioeconomic, financial, and leadership elements. And when you look at this, under human capital, what we've done is we've now said, okay, let's look at the components of the FSC and how do they align to each of these things. So in a nutshell, we're not really talking about EE in isolation of the broader piece of developing human capital. We're not talking about preferential procurement in isolation of things like enterprise and supply development. And then very importantly, we talk about leadership capital because your brand, your culture, your leadership must all evolve. And that's really how we've sort of tried to evolve and talk about our strategy through the years and provide that clarity of purpose.
Wow. I think that from a layman's perspective, the first time we met, I had the good fortune of sitting in your reception. And I was early, which was great because exposed was this wall of all these goals, and it was communicating the values and purpose. It was, for a visitor, it was so empowering to understand your position and where you were going. And one of the goals was to be the top empowered company in your business sector. And from there, it was so easy to connect with you as an organization. And it was so clear. And I can see how these things have worked because of your communication. But I mean, we talk around the change and the strategy, but strategy, it's all around people. And those people have got to be moved. And so we often talk around the importance of culture. And so how did that culture change happen within Nedbank? Because that was also immense.
Yeah, Ralph, that I think was one of the fundamental reasons for the success of the strategy. So I'm saying one of, but a very important, reason for the success of the strategy. So what you see on the screen is actually the Richard Barrett model and the methodology that we actually utilize to effect the culture change. So in a nutshell, like the Barrett survey, if we just have to look on the right-hand side. So what is it really? It's a culture survey. It's a comprehensive tool which allows us to measure and manage our culture. But beyond that, you will see that it measures cultural entropy. So entropy, like I alluded to earlier on, looks at the degree of dysfunction in your organization through value matches or limiting values, right? So if you look at this diagram, and Richard Barrett refers to it as the 7 levels of consciousness, because what you actually want to do is you want to raise the level of consciousness of the organization towards productivity and not dysfunction. So what you ideally want is value matches across the 7 levels. But what was happening way back when we started the journey, we would have, for example, had a lot of values which are alluding to level 1, which talks to survival. Now, when you're in survival mode, the values that'll come up are things like cost consciousness, short-term focus, etc. But very importantly, we also had values like bureaucracy, silo mentality. Now, those things, as you can see, do not progress or help you to move productivity in the right direction. So what we then did is we used the Barrett survey as a diagnostic. So just to touch on a couple of other things. So for example, you want values that span across the spectrum. So you want things like our values, for example, were accountability in the bank, integrity, respect, client focus, and people-centered. So we wanted to see those values also coming up when staff did the survey. So in a nutshell, what will happen for the survey is I will choose from a list of personal values to say, what are my personal values relative to what are the current values I'm experiencing in the organization, relative to what are the desired or future values that I want to experience. Now, so the ideal picture is that my personal values, accountability, currently in the organization, I'm experiencing accountability and I would like that to continue. But obviously that was not the picture. So typically you might get something like someone's personal value is respect, but what they're experiencing in the organization is bureaucracy and silo mentality. And then what they obviously desire, is for things to change, for things to be a bit more collaborative, etc. So we really use the outcome of that survey as a diagnostic to see what needs to shift. Now, obviously, to shift that across 28,000 employees is, no picnic in a sense. It's quite tough. So what we had then done is we then launched a program which was called Leading for Deep Green. And deep green also because, linguistics are important, color is important, all of these things are important because we use our 5 senses when we are trying to effect change. So you would remember from the other slide, we talked about deep green aspirations. So Leading for Deep Green was primarily focused on things like personal mastery, self-awareness, leading teams effectively, etc. So in a nutshell, what we would have done is we would have put our senior managers firstly, so the top layer through this change program, and then obviously tracked it over time. Now, at the time when we started the journey in 2005, we were told that we need to send at least 2,000 of our cohort of leaders and managers on this journey in order for the tipping point to be reached. And what's really great to show, Ralph, is that by 2012, we had not sent 2,000, we had actually sent 8,000 managers on this journey. And if you remember the earlier slide, that's when our entropy levels started coming down from the 19 and 20s to about 10. So that's how you could see like the culture shifting. So it certainly wasn't easy, but I think this Leading for Deep Green program was helpful because when you're talking personal mastery, it was also helping you with all the biases, that we faced. It was helping us eradicate some of the challenges of the fear and, seeing the reverse discrimination and some of those things. So in a nutshell, that was sort of what our culture journey was about.
I think my challenge now is we've got so many questions for you, and I'm sure I've seen some in the chat and the Q&A. So maybe if you guys have also got questions for Kirshni, she'll be answering that soon. We're just going to finish this presentation first and then you can go through it, but get those questions in there. We really want to know what you're thinking. But I mean, so obviously the culture journey is a big thing, and I probably want to go through that in a little bit more detail later. But the next part is, being in the media industry, the word creative sparks off, especially the 2 words, creative and compliance. So, what does it mean really? And was that on purpose that you put that creative compliance?
Yeah, so Ralph, definitely I personally put the word there on purpose. But perhaps just to explain, I'm just going to again share my screen. So in a nutshell, let's just talk about the amended FSC for a second. So the amended FSC, for people that are using it will know, and those that are not using it. So it's really 150 pages of legislation, more than 67 lines of formula across 9 different elements, and all of that now has to culminate into one BEE level. So when you look at this picture, Ralph, you can see the scorecard like this, which is a very linear interpretation, where it's ownership, management control, skills, etc. Or you can see the scorecard like this. So if you think about BEE and what was the original intent of BEE, it was about mobilizing South Africans so that we can bring more of the previously disadvantaged, if you want to call it that, into the formal economy and get the economy going and stimulate the economy. So if you look at this picture, it's saying that the scorecard was supposed to work in a specific manner, not in a linear or vertical fashion. So this is how you can get creative about the solutions you put in place. So you will still be complying with the law, but it will be moving towards substance over legal form, or the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. So if we just quickly look at this for a second, when you look at socioeconomic development and skills development, the intention is to be upskilling people. So if you look at the left-hand side, in theory, if you have skills, you should be able to become an employee, okay? If you get a job, then you should be able to contribute to employment equity, either through senior or junior or middle management. Now, as you ascend from senior to junior, or from junior to middle to senior, etc., that then talks to management control, because now you are controlling the companies, etc. And then from there, that then leads to ownership, because you can become a board member, you can become a shareholder, etc. Now, similarly, if you look at the right-hand side, if you've got skills, you don't only have to become an employee, you can become an entrepreneur. And if you become an entrepreneur like yourself, Ralph, then obviously you will contribute to preferential procurement in the company, but you don't really want to stop there. You want to actually become a supplier and do a little bit more. So then that should ascend or transcend into supplier development. And that's where we are creating suppliers. And just maybe on this point, our enterprise development program since 2015 actually created 162 new jobs, employed more than 490 people. There was more than 630 hours of mentorship and 27 million of contracts awarded. And just to give like one example, one of the companies that were on the program called Monabo, her turnover was 300,000 when she entered the Enterprise and Supply Development Program. In 5 years, her turnover is now 15 million. So, I mean, you can see the benefit of looking at the scorecard in an integrated fashion as opposed to a linear fashion. And then similarly, obviously, if you're participating in enterprise and supply development, you will get access to financial services. You would need and you would want funding and so on. And then, of course, everything else transcending into empowerment financing, and that will look at things like from transformational infrastructure to affordable housing, etc. But even with something like transformational infrastructure, if we were putting in infrastructure projects, we were also then aligning it to socioeconomic development and looking at how is it going to build and uplift that community. So I'm not saying we got it perfect in every aspect, but because the thinking was not the linear fashion, but more this integrated picture, I think we were able to be more creative with compliance. It goes back to the old adage, Ralph, of what the mind or what the eye sees, the mind believes. So if you just see this linear thing, you will be reduced to a compliance mindset. But if you see this integration of how all these things can work together, then hopefully your brain also starts moving into creative mode. So that's what it really is. It's not fronting and it's not window dressing.
Yeah, I think it goes to to another part though, is that how big business can help drive new business and entrepreneurship. And I think your diagram is so great because it's looking like a balanced, and it gives that perception of a balanced scorecard as opposed to a single viewed scorecard, and how it impacts all of society and how that continuous loop happens, which is really great. It's for anyone who's here, you definitely want a picture of that slide, because I think it defines things really, really well for anyone, how to benefit both parties. And it's about that. It's about creating that win-win for everybody, all the stakeholders. But I mean, let's not forget the last C, because we're in communications, we're a media business. Yes. What about the last C, communications?
Yeah, so Ralph, you'll be happy to know I don't have a slide on that, or the audience will, because I didn't want to do death by PowerPoint. But basically, communication was vital. So there were multiple levels from the CE himself communicating through dialogues, So people could send him Q&A, okay? Then it was communication through the staff roadshows at the time. Obviously now that has evolved into things like digital connects or CEO stand up through COVID. But the point is communication was happening with staff at various levels and from various different perspectives. So we didn't only stop, for example, at the CEO roadshow. Then what would happen is each of the managing executives in retail or corporate will also have their own roadshows. The guys in the rest of Africa who have a presence will also have their own roadshows. So there was a whole piece about roadshows. There was a piece about engagement through blogs, etc. But then very importantly, we also tried to communicate externally through thought leadership pieces and so on. Then we also had things called transformation dialogues, which was not limited to any person or whatever, whoever wanted to attend could attend. And what would typically happen from there, we would get insights in terms of, okay, what are people still struggling with? Or what are they still wanting? And then from there, if we felt, for example, Indian males were still feeling a bit excluded as minority, we would have like a focus group with them to say, well, what sort of solutions can you suggest? So, I mean, I think communication and connection happens at multiple levels in different ways, and different clusters in the bank also adopted different approaches. And some of them also would have just had, fun stuff and not necessarily, oh, well, it's a transformation dialogue now. But it would have also included things at the time, Ralph, where we would have taken the staff to the Apartheid Museum. And we would have also went to like Constitutional Hill. We would have went into Soweto and had lunch at a restaurant. Like some of the other clusters, the guys would have actually taken the trains to truly experience what was it like for an individual who's not living in the Sandtons to come to the bank every day. So I think it was an integrated communication strategy that, straddled many levels. And with that, Ralph, as you know, we continuously trying to improve. And then, of course, let's not forget the piece of where we are also working together with some of you, like, for example, on these conferences and trying to elevate the dialogue, change the narrative and do things like that. So I think, the communication spans across many aspects.
Well, we got the results of those polls. Okay. And which is really interesting. So do you think South Africa is moving in the right direction in terms of BE? 30% is saying yes, 54% somewhat, 16% no. It's interesting. Which BE scorecard level does your organization currently hold? Level 1, 62% on this forum hold a level 1. So what they're really talking about is how can they drive more impact or drive more, which is really important as well. And then why is Black Economic Empowerment important to you? So 24% involves practice by business needs. It improves inclusivity, 65%. It assists with stimulating further economic growth, 32%. It creates more employment, 24%. And a good rating can be used as a marketing strategy, 22%. Okay, so what is your organization main pain point? Our purpose is not clear, so that's not a problem. We need a culture change, 43%. I think that's continuous, to be fair. Better commitment from leadership is needed, 16%. So that's not bad. That's quite good. It's interesting that leaders are getting that sort of vote of confidence. Our creative compliance needs improvement, 35%. Also not that bad. And we need better communication to make solid connection. That's really important, right? So this communication, we're human beings, we're people, we need to connect, especially in COVID. So number 5, in which areas do you think BBEE has been well implemented? Profitability, sustainability. There was a question on sustainability that we'll go to: growth, global competitiveness, and innovation. So sustainability, it's interesting. And which BBEE score criteria is currently a concern? Ownership 24%, management control 32%, skills development 30%, enterprise development 43%. So that 43 is interesting as well, right? It's like enterprise development. How are we creating more entrepreneurs? We need to be doing that. So some really great insights from that poll. Thank you all very much for contributing. We'll share that as well. And it's something you mentioned. You're involved in these programs. You're involved in these platforms with us. Even now, you've won the awards twice, right? What's getting you guys motivated to move forward and carry on? You know, what is the future? And especially with COVID, right? How important is empowerment still to the organization with all of these outside forces?
I think, Ralph, you know, definitely, I mean, empowerment is important. You know, I think it's almost like a rhetorical question now. But I wanted to share with you an exercise that we did in 2015, because I think it's going to be interesting even for the audience. So please excuse me, because sometimes the slides just get stuck. Okay, so in 2015, Ralph, so I'm going to just set a bit of context and then answer your question, okay? So in 2015, what we were asked to do, I mean, because many of the audience are in the transformation space, they will be aware that there's subcommittees of the board that also look at transformation. And those are typically called a GTSEC, which really means like Group Transformation, Social and Ethics Committee, and it's a subcommittee of the board. So much like you have a credit committee or a REM community, etc. So at the time, what we did in 2015, we were asked to actually do a scenario planning exercise, which you will see here at the bottom left of the screen, to basically consider like what will this transformation and BEE or empowerment picture look like in 2020. Now, again, you'll see here, we're integrating it to what our group strategy for 2020 was. And we said in 2015, one of the things we wanted to do was to win in 2020 on different metrics and elements, etc. So now what we did is we basically worked together with Mind of a Fox, and I think you did have Clem and his team at your previous conference here. So in 2015, we worked together with them to come up with the scenario exercise, and the outcome of which at a high level is what you see on the screen. So what we did is, if you can look at my cursor, is we chose two key variables. The one was the level of social cohesion, so that being low or that being high, and the other one being the economic climate, because we felt those were the two key variables in 2015 that could help us to do our projection for 2020. So what we then said is we went through the normal scenario exercise, you know, doing all the research, writing up the scenarios, what they mean, etc. So we said, if there was a high level of social cohesion and a negative economic climate, we would probably be in momentum, because at least there's a bit more social inclusion, even though your economics are not working. We said if there's a high level of social cohesion and a positive economic climate, we call that connection, because we said, well, then we could also be doing regional integration with the rest of our businesses in the rest of Africa, etc. Then we said, if you have a negative economic climate and a low level of social cohesion, we call that inertia and fragmentation, fragmented society, etc. And if you had a positive economic climate with a low level of social cohesion, we called it segregation, because in a nutshell, the poor are remaining poor, and in the positive economic climate, you know, so the Gini coefficient is just not good or not at the levels we want. So we said that's called entitlement. So now in 2015, we said, so if we have to project to 2020, where do we see ourselves? So we said, we thought connection, there's only a 10% chance that we would actually get to high level and positive economic climate. We said there's a 20% chance we'd get to high level of social cohesion and negative economic climate. We said there was a 30% chance of us getting to negative and low level. And we said there was a 40% chance that the economic climate should start becoming positive by 2020. And we would still have a low level of social cohesion, because things like social inequality, unemployment, and the triple challenges are not necessarily going to shift across this line. So basically, that was what we said. So now if you look at where we are today, okay, we are still in inertia, but it's exacerbated by COVID. And that's the sad part of this whole story. Because when you really think about it, you know, in the era, well, before Polokwane, for example, our GDP growth was probably 5.4 and at those levels. And then as soon as we entered into the Zuma and the Guptas and all of that, we started progressively declining on our GDP, going into minus 1.5 and 0.79, etc. And then if you look at that whole era, what actually happened, and I think some of these stats also are available through Daily Maverick and other sources, you know, the GDP itself was eroded 4.9 trillion. The Guptas were stifling probably 500 billion over the 5 years per annum, you know. So, I mean, at the end of the day, Ralph, it's really a sad picture that we're facing because of all the corruption, etc. So when we come to the question, yes, of course, transformation still matters. It is still relevant, and so is BEE. But there needs to be a drastic shift, and there needs to be a drastic pivot. So yes, from the political perspective, but we all are, you know, experiencing the impact of the corruption. So that needs to be fixed. But also, I think on the actual scorecard, things like skills development has to pivot to accommodate the new world, has to accommodate digital, has to accommodate new ways of working. Then if you look at other aspects on the scorecard, you know, we need to look better at how do we balance the carrot and the stick approach. So a lot of companies, to your earlier point, who are level 1, by the way, like you can see, it's becoming a ticket to the game, you know. So that's why now the time is right to talk about real transformation and not and beyond the scorecard. So all these companies were sort of redirecting their funds towards COVID relief. So maybe it's about looking at how do these things come together even on the scorecard. So in a nutshell, you know, I think there's quite a lot of things we can do going forward. It is still relevant, but there does need to be a pivot and a different narrative across the industry for this.
Wow, Kashini, thank you so much. I think a round of applause to you and to Nedbank, and thank you so much. What I want to do now is, obviously, I brought in a specialist. I work with this colleague, Babawa, for over 10 years, and she is amazing at facilitating questions. And what I'd love to do is just introduce Babawa. Not only she's better looking than me, but she's obviously got a better voice, and she's better at doing this than I am. So there are some questions in the chat, and there are some questions also, I know, in the Q&A that Babawa wants to share with you, Kashini. But guys, I would encourage you to drive more of those questions as well. Perhaps, are you ready to rock and roll?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Keep those questions coming.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for that. Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Kirsch. Kirsch, first of all, from my side, a huge congratulations to Nedbank. Sorry, I don't think I can. I just had an issue there with my sound. A huge congratulations to Nedbank, Kirsch. Absolutely wonderful work that you're doing. Indeed, I can attest to the brand and cultural change. Nedbank at some point was a very strong elitist bank. I can attest to that. I actually have a funny story. I remember when I got to the taxi rank one day, and I first saw the first Nedbank billboard at the taxi rank. I was like, what is going on with Nedbank? Are they going through an identity crisis or what? What is the billboard doing in the taxi rank? So definitely I've lived to witness that cultural change there. Getting to the questions, Kirsch, there's a question, as Ralph said earlier, on environmental social governance. How does Nedbank integrate ESG into the overall concept of transformation? Also, does Nedbank have in-house ESG specialists? Any openings? I would love to join the team. That comes from Sitandi and Tila.
Thank you very much for the question, and very happy that you would love to join the team. If there are any opportunities, we will definitely let you know. Yeah, so I think over the years, you know, earlier on when we alluded to the evolution, so part of the evolution was also saying, how do we then look at the overlaps between transformation and the sustainability? So what we are doing quite right now is we as a bank have selected 9 of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, okay? We've selected 9 of them. Some are cutting across water, energy, etc., infrastructure. People will know some of the different aspects, gender equality. And then what we've done is we've deliberately allocated, again, you know, the commitment from leadership perspective, we've allocated each of our different MEs to lead each of those SDG work streams. So in those SDG work streams, obviously the transformation team and the ESG teams all connect. So that's how we really do it. And through our group strategy executive, we also have what we call strategy forums or work groups. So that's really how we're integrating it. And then when you start to look at our annual reports, our annual financial statements, you will also see there how we are reporting on them. So that's how we're trying to integrate it. It's not an easy thing to integrate, but it's also not too difficult either. Because if you think about it, the transformation and BBEE scorecard will talk about empowerment financing and infrastructure financing and so on. So now what we have to do is say, if we're looking at infrastructure and renewable energy and getting points for that on your scorecard, as an example. So now how do we as a sustainability team, and going broader than just a sustainability team, how do we look at what are we doing to help the Eskom scenario, as an example? Or what are we doing for clean water? What are we doing? And try and map all of those projects together. So that's what we're doing at a high level.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Kirsch. And then we've got another question from Haron Peterson. How do we position ownership element to the political arena? Sorry about that. How do we position the ownership element to businesses that are 100% white owned and not interested in BBEE at all?
Yeah, so, we faced the same challenge, but what we started to do is obviously deliberately connect with our corporate clients. So your procurement policies can drive that, because in order for you to do business with another company, there must be some sort of Black ownership. So when you do that and when you make it part of your policy, obviously your policy is not only looking at BEE, right? It's looking at price, it's looking at product. But when you add the BEE element as part of your policy, we were finding that was driving, a lot of the companies to also shift. So that was, like, for example, one of the things we did. And of course, very importantly, engagement. So even if I take an example of a Joe Public, we obviously had, and they are our marketing agency, as you know, they were not a transformed company previously, but then obviously there were conversations that we had with them and we sort of walked the journey with them. So I think what you can do is look at who are the companies that you still want to do business with, and then go and deliberately engage them and collaborate with them to try and get that picture shifting. And then, of course, unfortunately, if it's not shifting, then you have a choice, not to do business with them. Because as you all know, sorry, Babelwa, because as you know, if a company is operating in South Africa, they have to comply with the procurement policies. So, I think it's in their own interest to do so.
That is very interesting, Kirsch, because I would think that you would walk away immediately just because they're not meeting the scorecard. But you're saying if you are interested in doing business with them, why not walk the journey of transformation with them?
Yeah, because remember, Babelwa, in our world as well, sometimes you don't have a choice. It might be these are the only 5 companies that are providing that service in that industry, depending on what you're looking at. Where there's a choice, it becomes a bit easier. But where there isn't a choice, then you have to do that.
You'll have to walk the journey with them. And then we've got an anonymous attendee asking, how do you deal with the sensitivities around disabled employees with SANAS requiring them to be interviewed and openly declaring their disabilities? This is technically against the Human Rights Constitution of RSA. I'm not sure if you're comfortable answering that one, Kirsch.
Yeah. Look, I'll give it a bash because firstly, it's a great question. It's a great question. So I think for us over the years, we have had a similar challenge. So we personally did not force the employees. It was, you can declare based on a choice. In other words, you can do a declaration. It will be confidential. And some of them, yes, I think in our organization, because of the way we've positioned it, the guys are a bit more comfortable. But where they're not, you can't really force them, in my mind. You can't really force them. It's similarly to any of the interviews that are done in the BEE space. So, but I think even there, what the important thing we do is we start communicating at least 6 or 7 months before the audit to get people on board, and we give them a chance to dialogue. So there are instances where people will come and ask us, why do I have to do this interview? I don't want to do this interview, even for employment equity, not only people with disabilities. So we try to mitigate it like that.
Thank you for answering that one, Kush. I would have escaped it personally, but well done.
Yeah, no, it's just a challenge, you know, that we also face, yes.
Wayne Harrison would like to know, do you think if there is radical shift in the political arena through various elections, the BBEE compliance will fall away somehow?
Yeah, it's also a great question, you know. So when BEE was first invented, there was meant to be a sunset clause. So in other words, it was not something that was going to go on forever and ever and ever. The reason that it is still there is because the shift isn't happening. So like you say, if there is a racial shift, then perhaps we should then start looking at, okay, what is the necessity then for BEE, and just focus on the pain points. So I think it's also a bit of a journey. You have to look at the data points and then based on that, see whether it's still needed or not. But yes, there was definitely an intention for a sunset clause, which never happened, But, you know, the shift hasn't really happened either.
Love that word, sunset clause. I think I applied to some areas of my life there. Chris Hoffman, Kirsch wants to know, how does Netbank qualify companies for your enterprise and supplier development programs, and how onerous is that process for how onerous is that process for Netbank? Are the challenges Netbank face in identifying and qualifying these potential suppliers?
So I think on that one, Chris, I'm happy for you to send me an email and put you in touch with our ESD colleagues, because they definitely have a robust program in place. Yes, they will have challenges as well, but I'm not necessarily in, you know, the ESD space. I'm not in operations, unfortunately, to answer you, but very happy that you dropped me a mail and I will put you in touch with our ESD guys, and they'll happily answer for you. But what will happen is requests will come through from preferential procurement, for example. Then there'll be a panel that looks at it. And then from there, the process goes on. So there's a robust process, which I think I'm not going to do justice to be honest, yeah. But very happy to answer offline.
Chris, well, there you've got a personal invitation from Kush to drop an email. Korki is actually asking a question that I could also answer from what I've seen Netbank is doing. She's asking, good day, does Netbank have the whole BBEE department or just one person running it? If I'm not mistaken, Kush, could you just expand on, I believe that you guys have an entire exco that is a tasking for transformation, is that right?
No, so I'll expand on it. So basically my primary role, so I'm executive head for transformation, and then I will obviously report into one of the managing execs, and then we will work with the CE, the COO, etc. So my team itself is myself and 3 people. So at the center, we have 4 people that are looking at BEE. Obviously, my role, I don't only look at BEE, I also look at strategy for our cluster, but let's just stick with the BEE space. So in a nutshell, you can say that at the group level, we have 4 people. But the way we work with our and patients is we basically identify what we call transformation champions from across the group. So obviously they got their day jobs in access to financial services or employment equity, etc. And then we collaborate and work together with them. Then we also have a group transformation forum in place, which we convene on a quarterly basis. And then we also have other committees, like we have a group procurement council, or we have an SED forum. So all of these, so we have a governance structure where all of these committees then are able to contribute to the broader scorecard and the BEE strategy. And then from all of them, what we do is I will report into the group exco on a monthly basis, and then we report into the board on a quarterly basis as well. So that's really how the structure works. But in terms of permanent heads, you can say it's 4 people at group level.
4 people in terms of permanent heads. Thank you so much, Kush. I think that is it for our questions there. There was one more comment actually where she was asking for the slides, whether she can get the slides. The whole presentation will be available, the whole full recording will be available on the Topco website for your download and to also share with anyone that couldn't benefit from today's event. Are there more questions? Okay, I'm going to hand over to... Sorry. There's another question. It seems like a love letter, but I'm going to read it.
Okay.
Sorry about that. This is from Massimo. Massimo is saying, good day, Massimo here. I would like to ask a question around the sustainability of BBEE shareholders. Are BBEE shareholder restricted in their ability to realize their investments? If so, what does this mean for the sustainability of ownership scorecard? How is this managed in the industry? And lastly, could you perhaps provide insight on how these deals are structured in financing from your experience? Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Massimo. Yes, it is like a letter. I understand that. I will try to answer them. So on the first one, whether the shareholders are restricted. So for example, when our deal was executed in 2005, yes, the shareholders had to hold for the 10-year period. Okay, so there will be some restrictions, but again, it depends on how you structure your deal. So different companies could structure the deals differently, but generally the shareholders will have to hold for a certain amount of time, because that's also how you will create value. Like I alluded to earlier on, our share price was 74 and 75 in 2005. And then when after the shareholders held their shares, and then in 2015, it was north of 200. So it shows, value creating. Even if you look at some of the ownership rules itself, you will see that in the code itself, it will tell you, how you claim for certain things. And there are restrictions on, did the shareholders hold, did they sell before time, etc. And then on some of your other questions, Babalwa, which is no longer come to me. So that was one on restrictions. The other one was, how is it dealt at industry level? So I think at industry level for now, what will happen is people will comply with the rules that are in the BBEE scorecard for ownership. So that's what's happening now. But like I said earlier on, because the code continues to be reviewed. So in 2018, we started the review process for the amended FSC, but that's still in progress. So for example, in the code, you will find things like if your BBEE ownership score is declining because your shareholders have exited, then you can either top up your deal through equity equivalence. So in our world, for example, that will mean doing more empowerment financing or doing more of one of those elements, and then you can use the equity equivalence. In other instances, you will have to do a new deal and a top-up deal. Now, how you actually structure that deal is where our corporate finance teams will come in, and there'll be various aspects to that. It's not an easy thing, because you also have to consider things like your dilution of your capital, which is real in this world, because we are not even in a technical recession. We are in a real recessionary economic climate. So I hope I've touched on some of the questions, Massimo. Yeah.
For me, you have. I hope Massimo is also pleased on the side. But definitely, as you said, it will depend on the structure of the deal. In your opinion, there's a last one. In your opinion, will the new EE amendment bill be strongly implemented with the proposed targets? And do you feel this will be integrated with the BBEE certificate, or will it be a separate compliance, perhaps an EE certificate? How is Nedbank preparing for this?
So our understanding is that you will first have to get almost like clearance, or a certificate from Department of Labor to say that you've complied, in order for you to then issue your BBEE certificate. Okay, that's our understanding of how the process will work. However, none of those things it's still a bill, as you say. And even when the EE bill becomes law, then if they want us to do that, then the BBEE codes will also have to be updated to say that in order to issue your BBEE certificate, you first have to still get the EE compliance tick in a sense. And how's Nedbank preparing for this? Well, I'm working very closely with my EE colleagues. As I explained earlier on, we sit at the center or group, if you call it that, and then we connect with all of our colleagues. So our EE specialists are on the ball on this, I must say. They are also sitting on the industry work groups that are driving this with Department of Labor through BUSA, etc. So I'm connecting with them on a monthly basis. And we already have our organization ready for what we think could come out of that process. It's not something that, again, nothing is easy in this space, let me say that. But it is easier when you are connecting and when you have a bit of strategy and when you are having a clarity of purpose. So that's how we are getting ready in the meantime for the Section 53 in a sense, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Kirsch. That is it for the questions from my side. Before I hand over to Ralph, I just want to say I just love your passion and the language. You can tell just in your language that you live and breathe this. And what I want to take away and also give to our audience is something that you mentioned. You said your profits will follow when you follow purpose. That is it from my side. Thank you so much, Kirsch.
Thanks very much, Baba.
Wow, what a firebomb, hey? So thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you for the questions. I think everybody's sort of asking, can we have the slides, number one? Number two, can they have a copy of this presentation? So we will certainly do that. And I think this is all a run into next year's Top Empowerment Conference and the awards that's happening. So we'll also be sharing this through our newsletter that, like I said, Kashini contributes regularly to. Thank you so much, Kashini, to you, to Nedbank, to the whole team, firstly for supporting Top Empowerment, for entering the awards, and congratulations on the great work you're doing.
Thanks very much, Ralph. Really appreciate it. And thank you to the audience for their great engagement as well.
And Kush, if someone wanted to get hold of you, how would they get hold of you? What would be the best way?
Look, you can drop me an email. It's probably best because, to be honest, yes, I'd love to say go to LinkedIn, but when you're trying to straddle so many things, at least with email, I'm generally looking at it the whole day. But perhaps, yeah, they could just drop me an email if there's something.
And should we share that email in this chat box, or how do we do that?
So what I'll do, Ralph, after this, I'll just connect internally and try to see what's the best way to do it. Because obviously I don't want to be missing emails. So we'll give you what's the actual email to send it to. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Yeah. I think the response was resoundingly positive and very appreciative. So thank you so much again for your insights. Feels like we're in trade secrets here. So thank you so much. Hope you enjoy it. We finished on time, which is great. And my voice lasted. It all worked. And we had no blackouts. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.